Hello and welcome to Module 2, Imagery, the Senses, and Poetry. I'm glad to see you back here. In this module, we will be looking at the idea of image and why image is so important. In creative writing, it is extremely important that your reader is in the moment with you and that you're having the experience you want them to have. So in chapter 2 this week, Burroway talks about the way we use words and how important it is that we use words that evoke the senses. For example, she says, if I were to say not everything that appears to be valuable is actually valuable, that would be a generalization. It doesn't really tell us what the narrator is talking about, though. However, if we say all that glitters is not gold, that is much more specific. Clearly, it means the same thing. Not everything that appears to be valuable is actually valuable, but it sounds better, doesn't it? Glitter and gold, you have that lovely alliteration, and there's sort of an almost tinkling sound in the word glitter, and it definitely evokes a visual and possibly, for some of us, a sound. The trick is, if you can write with words that evoke the senses, images you can see and hear, smell and taste and touch, then you create a world that your reader can enter. And that is exactly what you want. By the way, all that glisters is not gold. While it's been with us since the 12th or 13th century, Shakespeare put it in his play The Merchant of Venice, therefore immortalizing it. So maybe you got a visualization of something like this when you hear all that glitters is not gold. In this case, we literally have gold glitter. Gold in color, yes, but not real gold worth anything special. Interestingly, our words image and imagination come from the Latin root word imago, which literally translate as a picture or portrayal. And images appeal to the senses, which is the foundation of imaginative writing. So let's consider more of these thoughts without images and compare them to images that contain thought. If, for example, someone said to you, it is best to consider consequences before proceeding, well, they might sound a little preachy, right? But if they said, look before you leap, that's more powerful, mainly because it contains an image. You call to mind jumping or leaping off of something. The verb leap is a strong action verb because it denotes jumping with some force. It's not something that is entered into lightly. Or how about this one? It is important to reassure your offspring with affection. Sounds a little blah, right? How does "have you hugged your kid today" sound? That's a famous saying from the early 1980s. Once again, it contains an image for us. It shows a specific action and the word kid instead of offspring, which is less formal, which is exactly what affection is. It's intimate. This is what we're talking about here. Thought without image is much less evocative. By the way, this painting is by Mary Cassatt, a famous Impressionist artist who was very fond of portraying the intimate affections between mothers and their children. This one from 1906 is called Mother Kissing Her Baby. So, I have here for you a long list of nouns. You'll probably notice that these nouns are all about emotions. But have you ever thought about how nouns that define emotion are rather abstract? Look at this list. Most of us have experienced every one of these. We've held adoration for someone. We've been amazed at something or been anxious, waiting for something to happen. We've been relaxed on vacation. We've experienced grief at the loss of a loved one. So as you look at this list, be aware of how many of these nouns don't provide any sort of specificity. They tell us how we or our character should feel or do feel, but they don't actually show much at all. Because the way we experience things is different for each one of us, and for each occasion in which we experience them, it's going to be different. And that's what we have to think about. Throughout this lecture and others to come, you're going to be presented with journal opportunities. This is the first one of those. When these journal opportunities come up, feel free to pause the video, work on the prompt, and then come back to the lecture. Or you can finish the presentation and go back and do the journal entries later. Either is fine, although I encourage you to do them as they come up. So, after explaining this one, go ahead and pause the video, write for 5 to 10 minutes, and then come back and press play. What I'm asking you to do here is to go back a slide to that list of emotions and pick one. Maybe it's an emotion you felt recently. And then write a short scene or even just the description of a character where someone is experiencing that particular emotion. The trick is to try and stay away from the abstract concept. Instead, use your senses. What did the character look like? How did they sound? It's not as easy as you might think. Sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and textures will create those sensory details that will bring your reader into your scene. One thing I'd like to touch on here briefly is that of the cliche. I will talk a lot more about this in a future presentation. But any saying or term that is overused, worn out, or just plain tired is known as a cliche. Remember from a few slides ago, all that glitters is not gold? It may be true, but yep, it's a cliche. Some of the most overused cliches often are associated with the act of crying, I've found. For instance, did your character cry like a baby? Did they cry an ocean or a river of tears? Did a tear slide down his face? Did she cry her eyes out? When we use a cliche, it often tends to lessen the depth of meaning. And sometimes it's really hard to get around. But in this case, when someone is crying, it might be wisest to just say they cried. So one thing I want to impress upon you is it's important in your writing that you provide sensory details, that they are concrete, significant details. So what do I mean by this? Concrete means that the image can be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched. It doesn't have to be all of those things, but at least one or maybe two. Try too many and you could overwhelm your reader, but you want to make sure the reader can experience the reality you are creating for them. Significant means the specific image also suggests an abstraction, generalization, or judgment. For example, think about an empty baby swing. It might suggest a loss. Maybe the child died. Or maybe it just means that the child has grown up and no longer uses the swing. When we talk about detail, that means there is a degree of focus and specificity to the item that we are describing. It's not just a car, or a sedan, or a convertible. It's a red-hot cherry red convertible. That makes it significant too, because we already have a preconceived idea about the type of person who might drive a red-hot cherry red convertible. Okay, so here is a second journal entry prompt. I want you to go to your book, textbook, Burway's Imaginative Writing, and read the excerpt from Ann Tyler's The Accidental Tourist at the top of page 21. And I want you to go through it carefully and compare the passage to the list of abstract emotions from a few slides earlier. Make a list of all the feelings and emotions you can find present in the concrete, significant details of those couple paragraphs. It's about a man whose wife has just left him and he's having trouble sleeping. So go ahead and see what you can make of it and write it down in your journal. Let's go through some of the typical figures of speech that you need to know. Also called tropes, figures of speech are expressions that are not meant in their literal sense, but stand for something else. They invoke an image. Metonymy is where one thing is represented by another thing associated with it. An example would be saying, all the crowns of Europe, where crown is another word for a king or a queen. You could also substitute the word suit for a business executive, or the track for horse racing. Synecdoche is similar, but it is where a part stands for the whole. For instance, saying all hands on deck means all people, not just their hands. Other examples might be mouths to feed or the team won by 6 runs. Here are a few more figures of speech that we will be working with in this course. Personification. Personification is where human characteristics are bestowed upon anything non-human. For example, we can speak of a breathing city. The city isn't breathing, not really, but it gets a human-like aspect attached to it. We can also call the wind a gentle breeze, but the breeze isn't really gentle. It doesn't know it's being anything at all. Gentle is a human quality. Most of you have heard of metaphor and simile. Metaphor is a comparison where we say one thing is the other thing. For instance, if we were to say the classroom was a zoo, that is a metaphor. With simile, we use the work like or as in our comparison. So that example from above would be the classroom was like a zoo. And some additional figures of speech that we often use. Hyperbole. This is an extreme exaggeration. You could say, he stretched a mile, or I haven't seen you in 1,000 years. Exaggeration. Hyperbole. It's also fun to say. The next one is oxymoron. This links 2 contradictory words. Think of the words jumbo shrimp. Is it jumbo? Or is it tiny, like a shrimp? Or seriously funny. Both pairs of words have opposite meanings. And then finally, puns. A pun exploits different possible meanings of words. Think, for instance, of a horse is a very stable animal. Stable can mean steady or a place where the horse lives. And what about you can tune a guitar, but you can't tune a fish? Tuna is the operative word here, meaning the words tune a or tuna as in fish. Puns are always wordplay, and your dad probably knows a lot of them. So think about figures of speech that you use and think about how they might work their way into your writing. Another thought on metaphor. When we do use metaphor, and it is one of my favorite figures of speech to use because it is so versatile, think about how metaphor can deliver a more powerful image of the thing you want to describe. It might be the totally appropriate thing to say, he was so angry I thought he was going to hit me. But listen to the power of this metaphor. His face was a fist. Can you hear the poetic quality of his face was a fist? The rest of that scene or poem just about writes itself. Time for one more journal prompt. I think you're really going to like this one, especially when you see what we're going to do with it down the road. I would like you making certain to use concrete nouns, not abstract nouns about emotion. I don't want you to make lists of happiness or joy or stuff like that. I want you to make a list of at least 7 things that you really want. Really want. Be as specific as possible. For instance, you might want something big. Like I have always wanted a 1967 Ford Mustang, fastback, and racing green. That baby right there. Or it could be something more immediate. Like I want a Culver's concrete mixer of chocolate custard with strawberries. So make your list. Make it funny or sweet or completely materialistic or some of each. Your choice. The key is to be specific. Be sure to put it in your journal with the date and the title, My Heart's Desire. We will come back to this for an upcoming assignment in another module. Okay, so writing poetry. Don't be scared of it. Here we have a dozen tips for writing poetry, and some of these may surprise you, but I highly encourage you to try them. Maybe you already write poetry, or maybe you've never written a poem ever. Either is just fine, but think about these things and give them a shot. They are good advice, although there are so many ways to write a poem. I want to give a special thanks to David Kirby and Jim Gustafson, who came up with this list, which we are about to see. So, I want you to start with writing incomplete sentences. Isolated images and poetic fragments will succeed occasionally, of course, but they will never pull together into a concrete whole. So when you first start writing poetry, go ahead and write in full sentences. It will serve you well. The next is this. Use concrete language. Include details. Appeal to the five senses. Remember that while fiction is essentially narrative, poetry is essentially metaphor. This is that. You will never be able to get your emotions down on paper, but you can say why you feel the way you do. And the result will be that the reader will have the same feelings that you do. That's what you want. You want the reader to share your experience. Next, is to employ standard usage. Use so-called poetic license sparingly. The real energy in a poem comes from fresh combinations of familiar words and ideas. It's that easy. Basically, don't try to be cute or cryptic. Say what you mean, but use your concrete images to enhance your ideas. Fourth, write in free verse. In other words, don't feel the need to rhyme everything. That can give the flavor of a nursery rhyme, and a strong tick-tock rhythm can become a trap and hinder you. The next thing is to title each poem effectively. Titles add meaning to poems and gain the reader's attention. A well-chosen title can add depth to your work. Next is to start small. Don't feel the need to jump in and tackle the big issues in life. Take a phrase you overheard, a snippet of memory, a dream fragment, a piece of conversation, and make a poem out of that. Number 7, write about what you remember. The present may be too close to see clearly, but things remembered from the past are often more enriched with meaning. 8, be a sponge. Not SpongeBob, but a sponge. Absorb what is happening around you. Write it down in your journal. Number 9, play dumb. If you think you know it all, you'll miss what's really happening. By playing dumb, in a sense, in your work, you're going to find more surprises. And when your writing surprises you, that is super exciting. 10, reverse the field. What does this mean? Don't just look at the obvious. What if the situation was reversed? How might your poem change? The next is important. Give yourself time. Don't feel you have to rush the process. Give the poem time to mature. Write it down and walk away and come back to it later and look at it again with new eyes. In this class, I will normally ask for a rough draft and a revision. And you might have a lot of starts in this class that you don't come back to right away. But someday maybe you will. And finally, find the perfect reader. Find someone you know and trust who will give you good feedback and honest critique. This can take time as well. We'll talk more about this in a future module. So, to wrap up, here are the biggest takeaways I want you to get from this lesson. Image and imagination are closely linked. Not only do they come from the same root word, they both require that you use your senses. This, in turn, requires awareness of the world around you, of sounds, of smells, of sights, of funny things you hear. And that means, for this class anyway, that you need to write. Awareness doesn't mean much if you don't chronicle it. Because even if you think you might remember it, many times we just don't, and it's lost forever. So, thank you for tuning in. I look forward to interacting you with this week, and until next time, bye.